Hey everyone, I just wanted to share a talk that I had given on November 9th to the MadPy Python meetup group in Madison, Wisconsin. This is this talk was not recorded, so I decided to go ahead and re-give the talk just to on my desktop here to share my slides, some of my thoughts about nbdev, and hopefully to teach you about nbdev. And this is for the newer v2 nbdev. So first of all, nbdev is a Python library, Python framework really, developed for Jupyter notebooks. And the idea of nbdev is to allow a user to develop a full Python library using Jupyter notebooks. And this includes the documentation, the testing, the deployment, and the continuous integration, as well as the .py files. So you really do get a full library framework. And yeah, it's really powerful, especially if you're used to working in a notebook environment. This can give you a way to develop a package. So yeah, so I kind of already just mentioned on the last slide, but the way that you start a new project is nbdev new. So once you've pip installed nbdev, you'll get access to a number of command line functions. nbdev new is one of them that actually creates a new project with the nbdev framework. So one of the coolest things, at least in my mind, is the documentation that is provided by nbdev. So this is built on top of Cordo, which is a really cool framework that allows you to build websites. You can either use Jupyter notebooks, or there's another .qmd file that you can use to build Cordo websites, and nbdev uses that functionality to host documentation for nbdev. And one of the cool things is this slide deck that I'm presenting right now is actually a slide in my nbdev notebook, because Cordo uses there's a couple different options, but reveal.js is one of the options to create slide decks. So this is all actually in nbdev at the moment. This documentation is. So this is what a function looks like in nbdev. So the first line here is called your directive. There's multiple different directives. The hide directive will hide both the input and the output, so it's kind of doesn't show up in the documentation. It's not going to get exported, and is really just for, if you're exporting cells at the end, you probably don't want to show that. It's not really helping, not adding any value. There's also this like code fold. There's a bunch of different directives. The one that tells nbdev which module you want to put this code in when you do an export is the default exp directive. So this down here would show this is saying export something like this to a file called filename.py. So the parameters here, you can see we've got var1 and var2. str and int here are type hints. This is a non-failing type hints, so this is just a suggestion. You can actually still pass whatever you want in here. So if there's nothing that makes this fail, it'll still process through fine. So but you are at least telling your user what you're expecting to see. So I think it's still helpful to use. And the comment is this is going to get used in the documentation to create a table, which you'll see in a little bit here. And the overall concept of this, line 2 through 6, this is called a document, which is a combination of documentation and a comment. Yeah, it's a fast core concept. That's where it lives. You can read more about it there. I think, yep, there's a link to it here. So I'll share a link to this whole documentation setup, so you can go look through these slides yourself as well. The output looks very similar to our parameters line. You'll see the type hint, which says what type we're going to expect out here, and then a comment that says what the return is going to give us. So this, I called this a signature. I was corrected here during MadPy. So this is actually a doc string down here, not a signature. This whole thing is considered the signature. So the doc string will show up as well in the next screen. I'll show you. But yeah, you can put a description of the function. So this is what it looks like. So here's the name of the function. Here's the signature, and then this would be our doc string. So you usually don't want this to be too long in nbdev, so you could make it longer if you want to. And then down here you've got the table. So here you'll notice our parameters that we had, the types that they're supposed to be, default. If there are no defaults, this will not show up. And then the details of these were the comments, if you notice that, for each parameter, and then the output. So one cool thing is you'll notice that this has a source link up here. So if we click on that, it actually takes us to the link to that location in GitHub. So our do something function is, it highlights it and shows the line of code that we're on. And so you could, look through the function if you weren't sure, if for whatever reason the documentation didn't tell you what you needed to know, you could actually look at the function code itself. So testing in nbdev is done with nbdev.test. So this will run through all of your Jupyter notebooks from top to bottom. There's also a GitHub action that comes with nbdev. So when you create a new project, you'll have a .github folder. So I'll talk about those in a little bit, but one of them will clean your notebooks and make sure that the notebooks are up to date with, actually that the libraries, the .py files, are up to date with your notebooks, and that the tests all pass properly. So that is all handled in the GitHub Actions. The other thing that GitHub Actions does is it deploys the documentation to GitHub pages. So a test in nbdev can really be anything. Anything that's gonna raise an error will basically work as a test. So FastCore has its own testing piece. Test equals is a really common one. You can also just use a regular assert function, or you can just run a function by itself. So This is the same function that I had previously. I'll actually move over to the notebook in a second, and you'll see that this fails because value, which I called out in the return, doesn't actually exist here. So yeah, it's failing, and it's saying value is not defined. It'll show you the stack trace and stuff when you run this in as a test. It doesn't here because this is like a reveal.js slide. It doesn't quite render it properly. So yeah, all of this works fine for testing in nbdev. The settings.ini page config file is used to tell nbdev a lot of information about your project. It tells you the name of the library, the current version, any other requirements that it has. It does a lot of things. It tells you where the notebooks are located, where the library should be put. Yeah, just a ton of stuff. So we can look at some examples later, or if you have, actually, I'm not going to look at any specifically, but if you want to, this slide will be out there, so you can explore that on your own later if you still have questions. This is one of the cool things that I really like about nbdev is it allows you to create command line functions from your Python. So this is how I would create a function called mad nbdev generate message, and you can see it is routed to my mad nbdev agent module, and the function is it's called like generate message or something. It kind of cuts off the screen there. And you're not missing much behind my, I'm just going to go no camera here just to make it a little bit easier to see. Yeah. All right. So the call parse function here, oops. Call parse is, it helps make your command line function actually work a little bit better. So if you do, mad nbdev generate message -h because you don't know what parameters are available, the help text will show up properly, which I will show in a minute here. There's also PyPy and Conda deployment, so you can deploy stuff directly to PyPy. I haven't actually done Conda, so I'm not exactly sure what that is. If there's another type of library that you can, or like if you can, like PyPy accepts like wheel files. I don't know if Conda has something slightly different or if it's just another server that you deploy to, but both of them are options in nbdev. I just haven't explored the second one. So some of the downsides that I've found for nbdev, I think that the tools for Notebook are still maturing. So one thing that I noticed is that GitHub has started doing some Git diff comparison for notebooks, which is helpful. I think that's going to continue to grow and get better. It's okay right now, but it's in beta still. They're kind of figuring out what all that should do. Eventually that might be really helpful, but right now it's okay. And I think notebooks themselves are still maturing as well. So the basically Jupyter Notebooks has been changing a lot recently. Yeah, probably the last really like the last 3 or 4 years. Jupyter Labs has been becoming more popular, and it also feels like the Jupyter development has been moving in that direction as well. I assume it's easier to maintain or something because of how much they've been kind of pushing it. So like the newest version of nbdev or sorry, the newest version of Jupyter Notebooks is a lot closer to Jupyter Lab than what the old Jupyter Notebook looked like. My assumption is that that's due to maintainability. I think that the extensions are probably harder to maintain in Jupyter Notebook, and that's just an assumption based on the fact that they're kind of pushing people towards the Jupyter Lab version of doing things. I think if you're kind of just getting used to nbdev, I think it's hard to work with other people in the same notebooks. So there are some ways to do it. nbdev merge is one example. So this handles merge conflicts. So if you have normally in a Jupyter notebook, if you have a merge conflict with another user, it will break your notebook and you can't even open the Jupyter notebook properly. So nbdev merge actually handles that so that they show up properly. And nbdev clean is another thing that really helps this by removing a lot of the metadata. So if the only difference was, the execution of the cells or something minor like that was just a metadata issue, that's not going to cause merge conflicts. So I think you can do some development with multiple users, but it still is. I mean, it's a more complicated than if it were just .py files because probably, I mean, some of that is because it's less mature. And my last thing, like my last downside that I have is just that, frameworks in general are going to cause complexity. So the hope is that the complexity added by the framework overall is going to be worth the upfront cognitive load of adding the notebook, which I think it can be in BDev's case. It's, I don't know, it's especially if you've got a team that already kind of is in the notebooks ecosystem. I think it can work well. So if you're working with a lot of data scientists that are used to Jupyter notebooks, then nbdev might be a good fit. Yeah, I think those are kind of the things that I've seen. And yes, probably the Slack one. It's not super relevant to people outside of the Madison community, but if you are in Madison, we'd love to see you at future MadPy events. It's a great community. Usually we have sponsors and we get pizza at the downtown Madison library once a month. If you have any questions or just want to talk further about this, you can either email me or if you want to see some of the code that I've written, there's my GitHub. So let's go actually look at some of this code, because so far let's start here. This is the slide deck that I was just presenting. This is what Cordo is looking for. So you'll notice I've got my title, author, date, and then this is telling it that it's going to be a Reveal.js slide. This is my logo that was in the bottom right corner, footer, which was the bottom middle, and then chalkboard, which is kind of a fun thing that I don't need to get into really here. Here's the test that failed. So one thing that if I run nbdev test, you'll actually see this on there as well, that it fails. And then here's a hidden cell that I have that's just exporting all my nbdev documentation and library. So let's go back here and get out of the slide deck and see what the rest of the nbdev documentation server looks like. So here's a basic notebook example. So this is kind of what I was showing in the slide as well, but this is a table. Here's what code folding actually looks like. So if you have it hidden, which I've got it hidden by default for this page, it'll just show the output. If I click on that, it shows the input as well. So if you've got a big chunk of code, that can be nice to only show the output by default, but then if somebody is curious, they can get to the rest of it as well. So one thing when I was going through kind of what I wanted to talk about with nbdev, I realized that it was going to be kind of hard to explain a lot of this stuff without actually getting into and building at least some library. So far I've shown you two of the modules for this library. One of them is called intro.py, and one of them, I don't remember what this one is called basic.py. So we've seen intro and basic. Next is we're going to get a little bit more advanced. So this is the agent.py, and this is actually the one where I started thinking like, well, let's try to actually explore a concept that I'm not super familiar with. So I chose OpenAI's chat completion API. So first thing that I did is I looked at the roles that were available through OpenAI's API. So you got the system, user, assistant, and function. So these are 4 users that all have different roles in the API. So a system message is one that's about the overall universe, maybe kind of sets up some parameters. It says how the assistant should talk to the user, or says how the user will be, well, I guess user kind of can do whatever they want, but it gives the assistant some instructions. The user is you. So if you've used the ChatGPT system, user would be like input to the system, and assistant is the actual assistant message back to you. But what's kind of interesting about this is you can actually fake messages. So you can send messages as the assistant to give the API an idea of what you're looking for. So this is kind of telling the assistant what the types of messages you're expecting to receive back will look like. So first thing that I did is I created this create message function. You'll see I'm saying the role type is going to be role, and the content's going to be a string. And I did this because I thought that the overall key here was a little bit, or the way that this message was set up felt a little clunky to me. So instead of having to do that every time, I set it up so that I could just call this create message function and handle it that way. And so you see I'm creating this messages list, and I go through, and first thing I do is I have a system message that says, you are the organizer of a cool meetup about Python. You're trying to get the speaker to wrap up his talk. And then I don't have any assistant messages, but the next one that I do is a user message, and I say, and now I will show you my 19th example on why nbdev is cool. Then I call the OpenAI chat completion, which I pass in a model engine and the messages list. So it's going to process through those messages lists, and it's going to generate a result from that. So if you look at this, here's the message that comes out, and here's the content of that message, which you'll notice I'm using two-dict recursive, which is actually like converting some of the OpenAI objects into just a regular dictionary. And then And then I'm doing a little bit of data exploration down here, which is really common in a notebook. And what's cool about this is this isn't going to show up in the library itself, but it will show up in the documentation. So if somebody, wants to show some of this, they can. If they don't, they can always hide it or just delete it from the notebook. I thought this was interesting that there were two different ways to call choices, as an attribute or as a key. One thing that I didn't know, but I was told at the MadPie meetup, is that this getting the attribute here, there's like a dunder getter function that every class has. So it isn't actually that complicated to do this, but I'd never seen that before. So I'm sure that it's just my lack of exposure, but I thought that was cool. And I wanted to make sure that they were actually equal, so I did a test equals just to look at that. So then I'm showing, I'm printing out the message. This is going to show up in the documentation nicely because I'm outputting it as text like it is. And then here's where I'm actually creating a command line function. So generate message will take in a system content string, user content string, model engine, and a message list. So yeah, let me actually show that in practice. So if we go here, we can create a new terminal. Oh, and one other thing I should show, while it's not going to take long to load, but I just want to show in the settings.ini, here's the console scripts line, and here's where I'm saying mad nbdev generate message and pointing to that generate message function. So you'll notice I was able to tab complete it because I've pip installed the mad nbdev library. So first, if I just do run that, it's going to return fine, but it returns this error, this error message, because that's part of the function. If I pass in help here, it's going to give me, you'll see my type string here, all the arguments that are available. So let's just actually run this and say you in Spanish, and then I'll send my message. Hello, my friend. Let's see what it says back. Hola, mi amigo, ¿cómo estás? See, so that's kind of a cool exchange. Like I told it, you can only know you only know Spanish. So I talked to it in English, but it returned in Spanish, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to do. And I love the fact that I was able to do that in the command line with very little understanding of what's going on behind the scenes here. Yeah, so once I'd done that, I kept kind of playing around with a couple other ideas. I created a speaker class that has. So my initial idea when I was setting up this talk is I was going to have two agents talking back and forth to each other. And when I say an agent, I'm just talking about an instance of ChatGPT. So OpenAI's GPT 3.5 or 4 or whatever. So that was my initial idea. I ended up doing a lot of a lot of system prompts here to try to get things set up properly, because I wanted it to almost read like a play where one person or one speaker would say something and then the other one would listen to what it was saying and then respond, potentially get in, 3 or 4 different speakers. I ended up getting something that worked okay. Not at the end of this. This one actually, this is using 3.5, and yeah, it didn't go great. It was the next one looks a little bit better. I used GPT-4, so I'll maybe go on to that one. But you'll notice I've got messages, which we've kind of shown already. I told it to generate its own backstory, so this is the backstory for Kevin, and I also told it to generate its own mannerisms, which you can see here. And one thing that's cool is because this is using Markdown, I told it to use Markdown to make things look better. If we go over to here, we can go down and actually see these. Oh, this doesn't look like I was hoping it would, because I didn't specify that this should be Markdown. There's a, if I would have printed this out, I think it would have worked fine. Yeah, I didn't do that quite properly. But I did do it properly in the index. So this is where you kind of show a user. So this is going to be, first of all, the README, which means it's going to be the front page of your GitHub. If you push this to GitHub, and the idea here is that you kind of show people how to use your library on the front page of your GitHub. I mean, you can do whatever you want there, but that's what I'm doing. It's kind of going through. I created 2 speakers using GPT-4, Detective Maxwell, and Goldilocks. And then I also, previously I made a setup scene so that this would just add a system message with this information. And I think this actually renders much better. So let's go to it, and you can see here I had just given it the rules. So he just said, this is Detective Maxwell said, understand, I will adhere to the rules. And so then here, this is my prompt that I gave it. I said, this is a system prompt, actually. This is my setup scene. You're in an interrogation room, questioning Goldilocks about a recent burglary. She doesn't know that you have an ace up your sleeve. I didn't know what the ace was yet, so figured let's do this and see what happens. So then I said, all right, talk, like you're up. And while he's talking, I told speaker 2, Goldilocks, to listen to what he was saying. Once he was done talking, I set up a scene from Goldilocks' perspective as well. And if you want to come read this, you can. And I didn't go too far, but I mean, this is 2 separate speakers talking back and forth to each other, and I think it's kind of a compelling read. So yeah, feel free to come read this, or I mean, I've shown kind of everything that's there if you just want to pause and read it. I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. There is, I didn't show it here, but you can also deploy your library. So I've deployed this to PyPy. So this is my this is me here. I don't. Oh, Pie Wheels, I guess. I figured that was PyPy. Yeah, let's see if I can search for it. I'm surprised it didn't. I'm surprised Google didn't get it, but yeah, 0.0.2. That's me, and you can see it pulls up the README here as well. You can link to the GitHub, but that's pretty much everything I wanted to show. So hopefully this was useful. If you have any questions, feel free to bring them up, and I would love to answer them. Yeah, thank you for watching. Bye.